Hello, everyone! And today I have a chance to say something I would never get away with otherwise. It's time once again for the Superior Comic Book Vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And today Dan is depressed because we're going to be talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 700. And we're also going to be covering the two issues before this that led up to this, 698 and 699, because we haven't talked about those yet, and we've been doing a series leading up to this on the Vault. Dan, Doc Ock is now also Peter Parker.
Yeah, he is.
And that's how they're doing this. That's how they're getting us into Superior. What do you think about that?
It might have been a little bit more interesting if the road getting there was a little bit better executed. I just really didn't care for this story at all. What did you think about it?
It really didn't work for me either, and like a lot of Dan Slott things, I gotta say that 698 I was kind of okay with, and really kind of enjoyed and thought that, like you said, the road getting here could have, it could have worked. I mean, I'll even go that far. I don't think the problem here is so much in concept, although this is, let me make no bones about this, this is not something I want to stick forever. The idea that, Doc Ock, at the end of this, being in Peter Parker's body, is being permeated with, he's being inundated with Peter Parker's memories and is kind of becoming some bizarre amalgam of himself and Peter Parker. When they tried to make us think that back in the 90s that Peter Parker was really a clone, they didn't get away with that back then. I don't see this sticking, and if it does, I'll be really surprised, Dan.
Yeah, I don't see it sticking too long either, although the fact that they're launching it as an ongoing is sort of weird. I don't know if this concept if it has enough longevity to be anything other than like a 6-issue arc. I don't know. You were talking about 698,
yeah,
and how you sort of enjoyed it, and I have to admit, reading 698 and 699 by themselves monthly, I didn't really have too much of a problem with them. When I reviewed them on The Vault, as a matter of fact, I said that I was sort of enjoying it. And when 700 hit, that's when he sort of clicked everything together, or didn't click everything together.
At least revealed his endgame, and then, yeah.
And it sort of destroyed a lot of the things in the previous issues that there's just a lot of things that don't add up. Like, for example, in 698, I just don't think that Doc Ock's plan for doing this really makes much sense, because he calls Peter to his bedside when he's dying, and they do the body switch thing, and he says, I have access to all of your memories, and I'm not going to tell you how I did it, I'm just going to leave you here and you're going to die. That's his plan. But if he has access to Peter's memories, he must also know that Peter will have access to his, and that he will eventually figure out how all of this happened and how to get out. I don't think Doc Ock is a guy that he calls himself the master planner. I don't think he's a guy that would have a hole in his plan that big where he's giving Peter Parker a giant chance to live here. I think he just would have popped him right there. Wolverine said that the cameras in the room were off, nobody was watching them, and no one would mind if they popped Ock off early. So that was one of the things that didn't really work for me in that issue specifically. But, like, my whole thing with this conceptually is they're sort of artificially getting Peter Parker to the place he was in before One More Day, where he's a little bit more responsible, he's a little bit more grown up, he's going to be in a stable relationship now. And I really wish that came from a character's place instead of this wacky plot device. Not that it's a bad concept, I just think we're not writing people as real people here. And that's what makes Spider-Man work really well. That's just the main problems that I had with it as a concept. But I don't know, what did you think of all of that stuff?
Well, you covered a lot of ground there. Not only are characters not acting like real people, but we're dealing with an idea that is so convoluted, it is impossible to define these two people's identities now. And I find that troublesome, Dan. You've got Peter's memories in Doc Ock, and you've got Doc Ock's memories in Peter, but then their individual memories and everything stay in their respective bodies also. So what transferred over? Their soul? I guess that means souls also include memories. And so what I didn't understand is why because he tries to use some kind of pseudoscience here. Why, when the memories transfer, do they get copied and not it being an actual transfer?
Right, and that begs the question, too, like, because we see Peter Parker's soul literally go to some sort of heaven in 700.
That's right.
So that begs the question, does Doc Ock know how to manipulate and transfer souls between people, too?
Apparently he must, because that's where it went. And he would have to, because otherwise, if you just straight up copied the memory engrams from one person to another, again, I think identity becomes a real question. It seems like what you would really have is just two people's memories, and this would be interesting, but that's not what he did. You just have two people's memories all in one person's body, and they'd be kind of fighting for dominance, and you'd be trying to decide, okay, am I Doc Ock or am I Peter Parker? He does that in far too literal of a way for me, and when you get to the end, and Doc Ock is actually kind of wrestling with that. It only happens because Peter kind of turns up the juice on the memories from the Autobot, right? Where he just kind of floods him with his own memories again, even though I didn't really understand what exactly was going on there, because those memories are already there in him, but he's just sort of like, oh, I'll just like control what he sees and make him, feel all the pain I ever felt in my past and make him realize how important, it is to be responsible. Okay, and so then he remembers everything and some of the images were cool. He remembers everything, all these big iconic Spider-Man moments as, like, Doc Ock doing them. I guess what I'm saying is, I thought this would have been really a lot more interesting if it had been kind of dealing, playing with these questions of identity. How about at the same time, instead of having that be a thing Peter does at the end that sort of just manipulates him into that place, that's a problem he's dealing with the whole time. And there are little bits of it, but not enough for me to really appreciate it, where like the whole way through, he's kind of like remembering Peter's he's getting Peter's memories, and he's like making choices that Peter would make, and they go, wait, what am I doing? I'm Doc Ock. I'm trying to get revenge. You remember? And then do the same thing with Peter. It's kind of a mess. I think I just don't understand where exactly people are. You know what I mean? Like it's really confusing. At the end of this, I feel like we have Doc Ock and Peter completely 100% fused, and so it's supposed to be okay that we maybe killed Peter Parker off. Although I'll tell you, I don't think he's dead. I think he's still in an Autobot someplace.
I think so too, and for me, the J. Jonah Jameson character arc in here and the Doc Ock one it felt like someone hitting a character arc button and then they're supposed to have one.
What was with Jameson in this issue? Why is he suddenly, like, impressed with Spider-Man because he's willing to hit a guy really hard and it breaks his jaw? What's that about?
Yeah, and he has this long, well, not long, it goes over, like, a couple panels, but he has this exposition where he's like, yeah, now I care about family, and the press is a disgrace and all this stuff, and I was like, this is kind of... I mean, Slott has been building some of this stuff before with how he killed off Jameson's wife, but it's just sort of a weird place for him to all of a sudden realize that.
It feels way too much like a hurried, like, series finale, like on TV, where, your series is about to get canceled, so you got to wrap up all the arcs real quick. I mean, it totally has that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And,
if you needed the room, why not just not do the 2-part Hobgoblin arc and stretch this to 5 instead of 3?
Right, very true. And you were talking before about how this was kind of depressing for me, but I don't think this is necessarily just depressing for people that are Spider-Man fans. I think the message of the story is a little depressing in general for me.
I agree with you. I think I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Because we have the place in heaven with Peter Parker talking to Uncle Ben, and he says, it's completely irresponsible for you to let this guy run around in your body. You can't die yet. You got to fight one more time. You got to get this guy out of your body. So Peter Parker proceeds to try to kill Dr. Octopus, which is something that I never really want to see Peter Parker try to do, but it makes a little bit more sense here because he's fused in Doc Ock's body, he's not in the same mindset, and there was precedent for this in the Lizard arc where he was yelling about how he was going to try to kill people for no reason. So there's been some setup there, and I kind of get that. But he tries to kill Doc Ock, fails to get him out of his body. He fails Uncle Ben in every way possible, and then he dies. He goes out in probably the worst way I would want to see Peter Parker go out possible. I just don't think that speaks to what the character's all about, you know?
And I feel like Dan Slott kind of tries to soften that a little bit by having one of the last things he does try to like pseudo save Doc Ock.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really strange because it's like you just tried to kill him, but now you're trying to save him because that's what Spider-Man does, except that you just tried to kill him.
Yeah, and he had been yelling in previous arcs and in this arc, too, about how the villains should rot in prison and die for their deeds and things. I thought it was very strange and very forced for him all of a sudden to... I mean, maybe because he was desperate and he didn't want to leave Doc Ock in his body, obviously, you know, to his own devices, but...
Yeah, and being Spider-Man, I mean, that's the big thing. I get the idea of desperation. I mean, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, I don't know. It's
very weird.
I just don't know. I don't know what you. I guess I'm not entirely sure how you would have done it differently without just rewriting the whole arc is the thing, you know. And I mean, I hesitate just saying, okay, here's how he should have written the entire story. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to do that. But I just feel like he kind of wrote himself into a corner where it's like, okay, he's only got so long to live. So he's got to. So if he can't get Doc Ock out of his body, he's got to stop him somehow. So then, of course, he's going to try to kill him. And then I guess his last-ditch effort is make him, you know, remember everything that Peter Parker ever did and give him this kind of responsibility message. Why not do that in the first place? If you think it's going to work. I don't know. I just, like...
Right, exactly. There's a lot of things that the characters do in here, timing-wise, that don't really make a lot of sense. Peter Parker's whole plan in Doc Ock's body, just like Dr. Octopus's initial thing in Peter's body, doesn't really make any sense to me. He talks about how he shouldn't go to the Avengers because they wouldn't believe that the body switch happened, even though he has proof, and that the Avengers have dealt with threats like that before. And then Carly Cooper's about to shoot him in the head, and he thinks that she'll believe him for some reason, even though she's a normal person. I thought that was a little weird. And then he just ends up going to the Avengers at the end anyway, wasting most of his time where he could have just went to them in the first place, solved the problem, and this arc would have been done in an issue. It's just like, I felt like these people aren't making rational decisions so the plot can move to where Slott wants it to go. And that's not a feeling I ever want to have when I'm reading anything in general, you know?
Me neither. I think Slott's biggest problem is organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I've got 3 issues to tell this story, and I've got to get to this point by this part of an issue, and I've got to get to this point by this part of an issue. It's almost like it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. It's like he's written himself a roadmap, and
right, exactly.
Instead of taking the most plausible direction, he's got to stop at about 6 Burger Kings first that are kind of out of his way, and that's really kind of how it reads. And a lot of his stuff reads that way.
The Burger King analogy is very apt, I think. I like that one.
It's like I just really want a hamburger right now, and then it's like, no, you don't need a hamburger. You need to go see the Avengers. Let's talk about language, Dan.
Let's do it.
Doc Ock does a really good Peter Parker impression until we realize he's not Peter Parker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge problem for me, because I've seen this done so many times in bad TV episodes and things where somebody... Because let's not pretend like this is the first time we've ever seen a body switch, right?
Right.
I gotta... Like, I don't want to be mean, but I gotta say, I have seen some fans eating this up. Like, this is such a great novelty. The idea of a body switch has never occurred to them. And that bugs me because this strikes me as... like an easy, obvious sort of story that's done everywhere, right? And it's usually just sort of a quick one-and-done thing. Wouldn't it be interesting to see these 2 people in each other's bodies? And it does what these things always do, which is so that we don't realize Doc Ock is in Peter Parker's body, he's talking like Peter Parker.
Mm-hmm.
And then, at the moment that we are told, hey, this is actually Doc Ock, and it's a really big, giant reveal, and I thought the reveal was done pretty well, then you get to 699, and then especially into 700, and he's talking just like Dr. Octopus all the time, even though we know that he can do a Peter Parker impression, and it makes everybody around him seem stupid because nobody's picking up on it.
Right. And Peter Parker has the same sort of problem, I think, and it's not even that it's a problem in and of itself, it's that it almost contradicts what you were talking about before, where Dr. Octopus is acting like himself, but Peter Parker acts like Dr. Octopus in a lot of places. He's using the same vocabulary, he's making some morally reprehensible decisions up until he decides to try to kill him. Like, he wants to save cops and everything, but he's willing to work with supervillains and people like the Lizard, and he's thinking to himself, like, I probably shouldn't work with him. He's not a trustworthy person, even though he knows that Connors is the one in control and everything like that. It's just very strange that Dr. Octopus acts like himself in both bodies.
Yeah, I found all of that very awkward because I couldn't be sure if Dan Slott knew what he was doing with it. If Peter Parker... I mean, if Doc Ock in Peter Parker's body had been doing the same thing, like I said earlier, where he did, because I think this would have been really cool if it was like, hey, I'm being helpful and responsible. What's wrong with me? You know, that could have been fun. You've got Peter Parker acting more like Doc Ock. But let me ask you this question: is it because Doc Ock's memories are messing with his head, or is it because he's desperate and trying to survive? I'm not convinced that he's doing things like working with supervillains because because, you know, Doc Ock's memories are kind of messing with him, and he's acting like Doc Ock so much as just he's desperate. How many times in Dan Slott's run, I almost said Doc Ock's run, if Doc Ock was writing Spider-Man, how many times in Dan Slott's run has Peter Parker had moments like that already, Dan, where he's like, man, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm desperate. I've got to do something.
Yeah, he's very... It seems like in every story he's done since Spider Island, which me and you sort of noticed the pattern where he's been feeling like he needs to do an epic, big story every single arc right after each other with no breathing room in between, really.
Yeah, that's right.
And he likes to pull Peter Parker towards that line where that he shouldn't cross, and he's been crossing it a lot of the time in his run, just in every arc. So I definitely see what you're saying. It's sort of the same thing that he's been hitting home, just in a different way. It's sort of the same point as all the other stories he's been telling, pretty much.
Now, Dan, I could be way off base on this, and I don't want to come off again as mean or anything, but I got to tell you, I feel like this story kind of writes itself. And I'll tell you, again, I don't want to just rewrite the whole thing, but he could have gotten to exactly the same place he got at the end if he just did it this way. Very simple. Here's thematically what the book should have done, I think. And I think I think it's kind of almost on the page, and then he just runs away from it like he's done other stuff. It's such a huge missed opportunity. So Doc Ock is in Peter Parker's body, and because he's got all of his memories and because he's experiencing that life, he realizes that he doesn't actually really want to get revenge anymore. He just kind of is beginning to like Peter Parker's life. Maybe he begins to actually fall in love with Mary Jane. Things like that. And then, on the flip side, you've got Peter Parker in Doc Ock's body, desperate to survive, on the clock, about to die, and he's almost letting people get killed. And then, he actually either directly kills someone or lets somebody get killed, and he realizes, oh my god, I am becoming Doc Ock. And both men, these other men's memories are completely flooding them, and they're having a really, really difficult time not being who they used to be. For Peter, it's because of this evil thing, and for Doc Ock, it's because Spider-Man's life is better than his life was, and he wants it. And then you get to the very end where Peter Parker's about to die, and Peter Parker tells Doc Ock, you have to go on and be Spider-Man because you're capable of it now, and even if I survived this, if I didn't get back in my body, I wouldn't be anymore. I'm no longer who I am. And that's his dying wish. And Peter Parker, or Doc Ock, feels a responsibility to him for that, because he actually comes to an appreciation of Peter Parker and wants to be him. The thing writes itself, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's where Slott thought maybe it was headed in that last scene. But I don't think he ever really got there because of the things we had talked about. And it's a really interesting concept to me, too, because I think it's an interesting place to take Spider-Man, because initially it was all about a kid learning to be who he is, and then you have here an old man learning who he is.
Yeah,
it's
interesting.
A complete and utter flip of the status quo initially.
And you do have this idea, these little snippets of an idea that I like, this notion that Doc Ock maybe never really grew up. You know,
yeah,
exactly. he was always insecure. He was too intelligent for his own good. Nobody understood him. He's still a genius kid in an old man's body who never grew up.
Yeah, and that's sort of how Peter was before the whole "with great power comes great responsibility" moment hit him. And some people would even argue that, I guess even Doc Ock and I guess maybe even Dan Slott would argue, based on the opening scene with Peter, that Peters hasn't really grown up. And that's sort of indicative of the problems I have with One More Day.
Yeah,
but,
me too.
The whole opening scene with Peter is identifying all of the things he does in his life that are kind of immature and somewhat irresponsible. So, yeah, there's some interesting parallels there, to be sure, but I just don't think they're ever capitalized on.
That's
the real problem here. I think Dan Slott has a lot of great ideas for the character.
Yeah, I think so too.
That, the execution is there.
I think that what I described as an alternate story of what this should have been, I'm with you. I think Dan Slott thought that he was kind of doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go this far, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, but even if the Superior Spider-Man thing were to be a long-running thing, even if it was going to go for 2 years, or heaven forbid, be like the new status quo for Spider-Man for a long time, where eventually Doc Ock and Spider-Man or Peter Parker become the same person, and he is effectively now just Peter Parker, but used to be Doc Ock, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think if it had been handled right, I could have been made okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could have been made much more okay with it than I am, because I think the reason that I'm not latching onto this is just because it doesn't feel like it came from a human place. It felt like Dan Slott wants Doc Ock to be in Spider-Man's body, in the Spider-Man costume, having to learn things about responsibility, and the reason he's there isn't real. It seems very fabricated.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what was I going to say? I totally just lost it. The thing about this that I really just couldn't latch onto, like you were saying, is I see all of the advantages of doing this. You put someone else in Peter Parker's body and you have him become him. You sidestep the Clone Saga as One More Day as being out of that Peter Parker's control. So you can have a Peter Parker that's who he is. You get rid of all that baggage, you have him with Mary Jane again, and you get to start fresh, basically. And that's what I thought the whole point of this really was to, or when I saw the idea, was to put someone else in the costume and create a status quo that was more to Marvel's liking with Spider-Man, and sort of just sidestepping their mistakes instead of addressing them. I don't know if that's where they're going to go with it, but I feel like that's the direction it might be headed in now. Who knows? I don't want to be a paranoid, jaded Spider-Man fan, but based on how the character has been treated in the past, I can't really, blame myself for at least thinking that,
I don't want to be paranoid either, but some of the clues are there, right? We've got that interview that Slott gave quite a while back, where he said that something huge that Spider-Man fans have been wanting is going to happen, but not the way that they wanted it. A lot of people are saying that especially after this, that probably he's referring to Peter Parker and Mary Jane getting back together. So, I think that clearly that's going to happen. They haven't allowed these two characters to kiss in eons, and they do that here because he's not really Peter Parker. The problem is they're having their cake and eating it too, because it's very clear that the direction this is trying to go is Doc Ock becomes Peter Parker.
Yeah, and
if you're going to do this, why not just do it? Why not just get them back together if that's what you wanted to do? I feel like Spider-Man fans are cheated by this. I do.
I do too. I feel like it's a really cheap bait and switch, and I'm going to be even more upset if Peter Parker comes back to this and has his life in perfect order. He's with Mary Jane. He's got a perfect job. He's in this really set position in his life, he comes back to it and he didn't do anything to get there.
Yeah,
that's going to really upset me.
And what if he gets back and he messes it all up too?
Yeah, that's very true.
You know, that would be even that would be even worse.
The whole Parker Luck thing, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Man,
I'm just not optimistic about the future of it based on this, and I'm dropping the book after this. I'm not going to continue.
I am so curious, and I guess I don't know. This sounds awful. I guess for me, it's too much like looking at a train wreck. I gotta know, I'm too curious. I've at least got to read the first arc of Superior because if he continues to characterize people like he has been for a long time, I don't imagine it will really work. But I don't know. I gotta say I am kind of curious. So I'm at least gonna read it. But
yeah. Oh, and there's one thing I wanted to mention before we went. We were talking a little bit about Mary Jane before, and I kind of wanted to address how she was written.
That was the last thing I wanted to bring up too. Go ahead.
I didn't think she was written. I just thought she was written very strangely in this. Mary Jane is one of those characters that I've always really liked because she's a strong, independent woman. And in here, in the opening scene of 700, it sort of sets the bar for how she's written in this, and you can sort of get everything that you need to know about how she's written in this arc based on the scene. I was talking to you before about this, about how it sort of read as like the opening to an adult film to me, to be honest. You have this guy that's smack-talking his woman. He's not respecting her in the slightest, and she rips his shirt off like they're gonna, start doing something, and he just put a movie on and gave her a snack.
Oh.
That's how relationships work in this book. And then she rips his shirt off and she's like, "Oh, you're Spider-Man, even though I've been reminding you every arc that's who you are, and now I don't remember it." It was just very strange to me. She was forgetting things that she remembered in previous Slott work, and I just don't think she was given the time of day in terms of being a strong female character.
I don't get that scene. It makes zero sense to me because, of course, Doc Ock's confused by that too. He goes, "Well, yes, of course I'm Spider-Man. You know that. What's wrong with you? And why?" And I actually kind of like this line. "And why is that getting in the way?" But it was funny. I don't think she forgot. I mean, I actually forgot. I obviously I think it's just this really silly thing of oh yay, Peter Parker. Oh yeah, Spider-Man. And she wouldn't be like that. I mean, Peter Parker and Spider-Man are synonymous in her mind. She was married to him and dated him for a really long time. She's, and from older continuity now, don't she and Peter Parker both have memories of them being married now, or not?
See,
am I wrong about this? Maybe I don't remember.
The whole one moment in time thing is so convoluted that we don't really know.
Okay, all right.
What basically happened was they did this thing where Peter Parker was in this bubble and everyone was outside of it was gonna forget everything about the marriage, and she jumped in too. But then they did one more time, I think, that sort of explained that they had broken off the relationship before the wedding, just before, because Mary Jane couldn't reconcile being the wife of Spider-Man. It was not to my liking.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. The other big problem I have with her in this, and frankly I think I have this with a lot of the supporting characters, is that Peter Parker is obviously not sounding like himself. He's not sounding like himself after, again, we find out who he really is. And it gets ridiculous, the kind of language that he's using that only Doc Ock would use, and he keeps calling her woman.
Yeah.
And they start making out right after he calls her that. Mary Jane wouldn't put up with that. He says woman, and then they're making out. No, Mary Jane would be like, "What's wrong with you? You don't talk like that, and you're not gonna disrespect me like that." She would slam the door and not answer her phone for 3 days. That's what Mary Jane would do.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was the same sort of thing previously in Slott's run when he was with Carly Cooper. there was points where Peter Parker was ducking out on her, and she called him out on it and was like, you're lying to me. What's going on? And he wouldn't give her an answer. So, you know what she did? She proceeded to get a Spider-Man tattoo and sleep with him later that day.
I know. So
that was her reaction. I just don't think the women in this book are written like real people, but I don't know.
Well, and I don't think the men are either, really. I ultimately, for me, Dan, it just comes down to Dan Slott is a fun comic book writer. He's got great ideas. He doesn't know, as you've always said, enough about relationships, and he's never really been up for the task for this book, with some notable exceptions. Like I said, I still really like Spider Island. I know some people don't. I think it worked pretty well. I think even the ending of that was okay. If it was the only time Mary Jane has ever reminded him that you're Spider-Man and here's the great things you've done for this city, it would have been fine. If that was the only time it ever happened,
Right,
all of that would have been fine. Again, I know I've said this before, but I feel like we rag on Dan Slott kind of hard because this stuff just isn't working for us. I like him as a writer. I like him. I've liked other things that he's done. I think he is.
Me too.
I think he is amazing at kid stuff, and that's not putting him down. Comedic. Like cartoon stuff is not easy to write and get right either. He's really good at that kind of stuff. And I miss him doing stuff like that because that's what he's really good at. And some of the ideas that he brings to the table here, if he was just an idea guy, if he was just handing some of these things to Bendis or guys like that and was like, okay, here's a crazy idea. Let's have Peter Parker and Doc Ock switch bodies and kind of be the same person at the same time. Go. Somebody could make this work. It's just not Dan Slott.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the stories that I liked of his that were pre the big time era where he took over by himself, I liked those stories a little bit more because he had people to bounce off creatively, and he didn't necessarily always have to deal with the relationship stuff because he could have other people handle that stuff for him. So it wasn't, he just got to do fun, big action Spider-Man stories like More Ways to Die, I think one of the arc with Anti-Venom was.
Was that Dan Slott?
Yes, it was.
I didn't realize that when I read it back when it was out. Because I wasn't reading a lot of current at the time. I loved that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that stuff was great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. It's just I haven't been enjoying it recently. That's my problem. Not to say that Dan Slott hasn't written other good things. It's just that
he has.
I just can't get into this, and I'm very sad, but sure that I'm going to be staying away from Spider-Man until it becomes something that I'm interested in. So,
well, anyway, thanks everybody for watching, and I tried to give this as much of its due as I could. Like I said, I liked the lead-in, like with a lot of this stuff, and thought maybe I was wrong about it. I was like, maybe this is going to end up working, and 700 was just all over the place.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not like we didn't try. We gave this its fair due. It's not like we read the first issue, raged about it, and then quit. We gave the full story its try, and these are the things that didn't work for us. I mean...
And we gave it a try, Dan, to be fair, after arcs and arcs that we didn't like for about...
Exactly. Like, I've been trying to get
months and
myself
months.
Excited about this book for hundreds of issues, and it's just not doing anything for me, so...
Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching the Comic Book Vault, and Dan and I will be with you again soon to do another one. Dan, we got to get back to some more Simonson Thor, dude.
We do. I like Simonson Thor a lot. It'll be nice to sort of have a positive note to end on next time.
We also have some more like Venom miniseries from the 90s we want to tackle, and there are a number of arcs that have recently ended that I think we're probably going to want to go back to, and the first arcs of Marvel Now stuff will be finishing up here pretty soon in a couple months, so we'll be ready to do more recent stuff also for you. So thanks as always for watching, and if you'd ever like to send me anything to review on the Comic Book Vault, you can always send that to our P.O. Box. That's Geekvolution, P.O. Box 14183, Lenexa, Kansas 66285. Thanks everybody for watching. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
We'll see you next time.